had in Korea in 1950, died down here at Fort Sill. So the day that they was to bury him was the day of the seminar. So I think the funeral was about 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I was going to make what I could of that up there, and then make it, and then go to the funeral. But you know, it's kind of a tough situation, that PW deal. It was one of those deals where you wasn't considered a war. You was in between there, somewhere. I don't know where you'd find the middle ground to place it. But then it got to the point where it got so damn disgusting to me, I just didn't talk about it to nobody. And VA, until a couple of years ago, they had me carried just as a regular retired veteran. I happened to mention it one time to an old boy that I was ex-prisoner in Korea. He said, well, hell, Forehand, said, your records don't indicate this. And he went and got him, and he left for about 15 minutes, and he come back, and I guess he called Muskogee or someplace. And he said, hell, said, boy, said, you've got a lot more privileges than the regular retired GI and stuff like that, you know, vet. And I can go up there to VA now, and I'm a celebrity. But, and all that stuff in that seminar, they was telling us how damn good they'd been to us, and what they was there for. They was telling us that they was really carrying us around with a silver tray. And that's one thing I never have wanted anybody to do is show any favoritism. I got into it with a bird colonel at Fort Sill, Oklahoma in 1955 over there. And I went to the post commander at that time. And did you know what? I ain't saw that colonel since then. He told me we got into it on arm swing. It wasn't straight to the front and straight to the rear, and I was doing this number, see. I didn't know who in the hell he's talking to. He said, Sergeant, swing him arm straight to the front and straight to the rear. Well, back in them days, it was 6 to the front and 3 to the rear. And hell, I didn't know he's talking to me. And pretty soon he walked up and just grabbed me and jerked me out of rank. He shouldn't have done that, because I come unglued on him. And he called the first sergeant, and he's down here at Sill now. Old Charlie Boyle, he's a retired lieutenant colonel. And I told him, I said, Colonel, I can't touch you, and don't you put your hand on me again. That's aggression in any way you want to look at it. Well, that didn't sit good with that damn colonel either. Mm-hmm. Well, he told me to report to him at battalion, and me and the first sergeant, so we did. And we got down there, and the sergeant major had time to brief that old colonel. And he told him that I was just recently released, prisoner of war in Korea, this, that, and the other. And that son of a bitch called me in there, and he said, there's one thing I want to get straight from you, Sergeant. Because you was a prisoner in Korea, don't cut no wise for me, and don't expect any special privilege. And I let in on that colonel like he was a PLC. And I just done a about face and left. I didn't even salute him on that. And I went straight to post headquarters. And I got up there, I was trying to think of the general's name. But old Neil was a sergeant major. And I busted into old Neil's office, and I told him I wanted to see the commanding general. And old Neil said, well, honey, you're crazy. You got to go through Channel. I said, the hell with Channel. I said, I want to see the damn general, and I want to see him right now. And so happened, old general's in his office, heard the situation. He run me in there. And I told him what took place. And he called my first sergeant, old Charlie, told him, said, yeah, that's exactly what happened.
Now that.
And to this day, I never saw that damn colonel again. Never. What, honey?
I thought that tape was off.
Well, that's all right. We probably won't need it. I just wanted it to refresh my memories on my...
I think we was aggravated with how that come out, and I think it threw the whole business away.
Okay. Okay. That's all right. Okay.
You about ready?
Anytime you want to go.
What's your full name?
Billy P. Forehand.
Billy P.
P.
Forehand. And is this Tribby?
Tribby, Oklahoma.
What's your address at?
Route 2, Box 213. Now, our mailing address is Wynnewood. Wynnewood, Oklahoma. 74878.
74878.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But we're actually in Tribby.
Yeah.
Tribby.
Okay. This is February 2nd, 1988. My name is Joe Todd, and this is an interview with Mr. Billy P. Forehand in Tribby, Oklahoma. Sir, where were you born?
Roof, Oklahoma. R-U-F-E. That's in Curtin County.
When's your birthday?
32. 4th, 14th, 32.
4/14/32. Who is your father?
Coleman Henry Forehand.
C-O-L-E-M-A-N.
Mm-hmm. H. Forehand.
And your mother?
Nora Forehand. Nora B.
What was her maiden name?
Clay.
Right. And where are your parents from?
Well, they're originally from Arkansas. The name of the town I can't come up with it right off the top of my head. It's in the vicinity of Vanderbilt, down in that area, Mena. And, but really, they're both from Arkansas.
Did they say why they came to Oklahoma?
No, my daddy was the first one of them, I think, crossed the line into Oklahoma, and probably because of work back in them days.
What kind of work did you do?
He was a blacksmith. He owned it. Yeah, to start out with, he owned his own blacksmith shop there in Root. He done pretty good until the hard times hit, and then everybody run out of money, and he had to go seek other employment.
Yeah. Do you know your grandparents?
No, I just know my grandpa on my father's side.
And were either one of your grandparents in the Civil War?
That I couldn't say. Yeah, I really couldn't.
Okay. So
My dad was in the First World War.
He was.
Yeah. There's a picture of him and Mama right up there.
Yeah. Where did he serve in the First War?
He got to France, Argonne Forest in France, and I think they went over into Germany. He was in the 169th Infantry Regiment. I know that.
So after the blacksmith shop, what did your father do? What kind of work?
CC camp.
He did.
Yeah. He come to Wynnewood up here. That's where we claim our hometown now, Wynnewood. And he was a blacksmith in the CC camp blacksmith shop there. And then it moved from there to Broken Arrow, and then after Broken Arrow, in about 41, Second World War broke out. He worked up at the Naval Station and various other jobs.
What did he do for the CCC?
Blacksmith.
He was a blacksmith.
Yeah.
So he had a permanent job with the CCC.
Yeah.
Oh.
It was well, you know what it was. CC camp was a federal, same as the Army. It was run. The Army officers, they even had first sergeants and company commanders and all that.
Did you do any work or anything around the camps in those years?
No, I was pretty small. All I done was give my dad problems, I guess. Most of the time we lived out on the farm, and of course at that time I was too young to do anything except just remedial chores like help around the farm. You know.
Did the family stay at Wynnewood, or did the family travel with your father?
Well, after he got in the CC camp, we lived there at Wynnewood for I think he must have come up there in about 35 or something like that, 36. And then we moved, after we stayed there until probably 40, 39 or 40, and then went to Broken Arrow. We wasn't over there but about a year, and it busted up. Oh, they disbanded all of them, and then shortly after that, the Second World War broke out.
What did your father do during the war?
He worked at Douglas Aircraft, which is now Tinker Field.
And you all lived in Oklahoma City then?
Yeah, Jesse could fit you in on that more than I could, because at this time I was in the military, see.
Okay.
I went in from when I was just a little bit young, and when I was 16. And after I got back from being a PW and everything, well, they cleared it through Wilbur M. Brooker. That if I'd put 20 years continuous service in it, I wouldn't have to make up any bad time nothing, because I'd been a prisoner of war there in Korea, which was a pretty good break, because I'd had to made up over a year.
Yeah.
But I got the letter somewhere or another from Wilbur M. Brooker. I don't know if you've ever heard of him or not, but he was a secretary back in them days.
So where were you living during World War II?
Wynnewood.
Wynnewood. Yeah. Was there any organized effort to support the war? You know, they had metal drives.
Oh yeah,
drives.
hell yeah. We had can drives, war bonds. And they had stamps and they had bonds. And of course, each school was supposed to get so much and we done our best. I think we done more than our share. They even at one time they sent people from the naval base up at Norman down and give us all rides and jeeps and weapons carriers because we had met the quarrel and more and metal drives and stuff like that. So.
Was there a celebration there when the war ended?
Yeah, I was in school the day the war ended, and when I found out the war was over, well, all the sirens in Wynnewood was turned on, and all the schools run out on the playgrounds, and I'm pretty sure they had a flyover by aircraft. I'm pretty sure of it. And it was a big thing. Them sirens went on for probably 20, 30 minutes. It was all over.
So, when did you join the Army?
September 48.
September 48. Where'd you go for basic?
Fort Sill, Washington. I went from Wynnewood to Ardmore to Fort Ord, California, and then stayed there and got our shots and stuff like that for 2 weeks. Then we went to Fort Sill, Washington, to basic.
Now, did you enlist or be drafted?
Enlisted.
Why the Army over the Navy or Air Force?
Well, there's the only one that would take me. I went for the Navy, and that old boy laughed at me. He said, "Boy, we know you're too young." And so I waited a few days, and I went to the Army, and the old boy first told me, he said, "You're too young." I said, "I just can't handle you." And by the way, the same recruiting NCO, name was Spalding. He got me on my first, second, and third enlistments because he got me the first time, and then the next time I re-enlisted was in the 50s after I got out of PW camp. I enlisted for 3 years to start with, and I was in 48. So in 53, after I got released, he was Fort Sill post recruiter, and the next year, next enlistment, the same way. And he's the reason that he got clearance from Brooker, Wilbur M. Brooker, that I could retire, because he knew that I was underage when I went in. And he told me, he said, "I'll tell you what," he said, "you've been through some pretty rough spots," he said, "and we both know that you're underage. So if you'll let me, I'll write Secretary Brooker and get it approved." He said, "I can get it for you." And he did, and I had the letter in my jacket all the time I was in it. I put the 20 years consecutive 20 consecutive years on active duty that I could retire without making a bad time. What was
we were talking about why you joined the Army.
Oh yeah.
The Navy.
Well, this recruiting sergeant told me, he said, "If you get your mother and daddy to sign the papers, I'll let you go." And so through hook and crook, I got the paper signed the way I went.
Tell me about basic.
Well, we took it in 48, and the weather out there in 40 and well, still yet, never got extremely cold or nothing, but we was taking basic in October, November, and part of December, and it was just a slow drizzle all the time. You stay out in it for a couple hours, you was miserable. And that's the way they wanted you to be anyhow. And back in them days, they give you basic training. We had to start out with, we had one 5-mile full field, 10-mile, about 3 or 4 15-mile. Now some of these were sports marches. Back in them days, they believed that you would leave your unit area with a 250-man company, and when you reach your objective, you'd still have about 250-man company, and you could reach it at 5 miles an hour, which is double time 3 and walk 2. With full field packs, and in them days, they probably weighed the average guy, unless he had extra equipment to carry, was carrying about 60 pounds. Carried all your weapons and all that stuff. Then 20-mile, 25-mile marches. They take you there. Back then, when they took you out to the rifle range, you stayed out there 2 weeks. You done all your PRI training, preliminary marksmanship instruction, and then the last 3 or 4 days you qualified. And when we was qualifying out there, we was in mud about 6 inches deep.
You have the M1?
Yeah, old M1. And to date, it's still the best weapon they've ever had.
M1 Grand.
You could throw it down the mud hole, and 2 days later go by and pick it up and keep shooting. The ones they got now, you better not try that one.
So I had that in Vietnam.
You know, I trained troops to go to Vietnam. I'm going to tell you some of the deals we got back on. We trained them so thorough. If they'd have a misfire on a weapon, they'd raise their hand in combat and want the sergeant to come over to clear it for them. Now, we got that back if that was what was going on. Said a troop with that. Now, you wouldn't think that a combat troop would be that dumb, would you? But we got that kind of information back, and we'd have to adjust our training accordingly, you see.
So basic lasted how long?
8 weeks.
8 weeks.
Well, it was actually 16 weeks, but they didn't have it broke down then like they do now. After you got out of your basic training, you got strictly an infantry basic training. You still get the same thing, but then you went to the units that you were going to be in from then on, or whatever career plan that you were going to be, and there you took another about the same as basic, only you was on the weapons and stuff that you were going to be with.
So what kind of advanced training did you have?
Artillery.
Artillery. At Fort Sill?
Fort Sill. Well, no. We had we activated the 4th RCT, Regimental Combat Team, at Fort Lewis, Washington. And a combat team back then consisted of a unit of probably 5,000 or excess or more men that would operate independently. They had their own tanks, their own artillery, their mortars, their ordnance, all combat support units. It was one little organization, and really what they was trying to do was come into the cantonment concept of combat, where you had 5 units instead of a 3-regiment infantry division. We was in the 36th Artillery,
What division?
2nd Division, but this regimental combat team was 4th RCT, but it was attached to the 2nd Division for support and stuff like that. It's actually a separate unit, what we call a bastard unit in the military. And we got our support from them, what was necessary.
So you took your advanced training there at Fort Lewis?
Right. We took both AIT and they call it AIT now.
Yeah.
But it's not. It wasn't called that in them days. It's right off the top of my head. I couldn't.
Advanced individual training or whatever.
That's what it is now.
Yeah. What type of barracks did you stay in at Fort
Wooden.
Lewis?
The old barracks that was constructed for the Second World War that was only intended to last for 10 years. Of course, they had them in use up until I retired in '69 also.
I went through there going to Vietnam, and we stayed in. Okay, and how long did your artillery training last?
Oh, well, like I say, for the next 18 years, 19 years, because I was in the artillery from then on. So, in the military, you're in a continuous training program. You're either being one of two things. You're either being trained or you're training somebody. And that's at repetitions is where we get the automatic fighting man.
So the second 8 weeks, what type of artillery piece?
105.
105.
Started out on 105, and during the course of my 21 years, I shot and was chief of firing battery of anything with 75 French pack artillery piece that they used to take apart and pack on mules, up to include Honest John Rocket.
How many men in the crew of 105?
Well, there's 7 cannoneers when I started out on your towed now. It depends on whether it's a self-propelled or a towed weapon. But your old 105 crew was 7 cannoneers, a gunner, a chief of section, and a truck driver. It'd be a total of 10 men.
What about the self-propelled?
Well, their self-propelled cut out a bunch of people. You still had your chief, your gunner, and driver. And then you had what they call a number 1 man. He's the one that fired the piece, actually. Opened, closed the breech block and fired the piece.
What rank does he have?
E4. Number 1 is E4, gunner's E5, chief is E6. Chief of firing battery E7. And of course, back in them days, first sergeant. E7 was as high as you could go up until about 58, then they come out with a super grade, E8s to 9s and stuff like that.
On the projectiles of 105, If I'm not mistaken, they have the casing. It's all in one. You just slam it
Well, yeah, and in artillery, you've got three different types of ammunition. You've got the fixed, the semi-fixed, and the separate loaded. 105 has got the canister just like a shotgun will take, but it's not together when you get it. The projectile comes in one container, and it's all in one container, but it's not assembled. You assemble it at the firing site, but it is what they call a fixed ammunition, and you could cut charges. It had charges 1 through 7, and this is so you could vary your range and stuff. But then your separate loaded, a fixed. I'm sorry, I got wrong. A fixed is what your tanks fire. Okay, that's tanks and some of your anti-aircraft. But your 105 was semi-fixed. Like I say, you had to assemble it once you got it. And then your separate loaded, you loaded your Projo, and then your powder charges, and you close your breech block and inserted your primer with your firing line.
Mm-hmm.
That's the difference to three types of ammunition that artillery uses. But you had, I couldn't even begin to tell you now how many different types. But like we had the CVT, controlled variable time. We had WP, which you could shoot with either fuse. And normally WP, white phosphorus, was shot with a time fuse so you could get an air burst and you do more damage out of it. You had your PD, point detonating, it hit the ground in so many second delay or millionth of a second, whatever. Give it time to bury and then blow and stuff like that. But they got so many different kinds of ammunition for the tubes now, I couldn't even begin to tell you what it is.
How were the ammunition transported back in those days?
Well, you had your regular emerald trains. You had back in the old days, we had 5 batteries in our artillery battalion. A headquarters, service, A, B, and C battery. And your headquarters battery was where all your support people was, your survey and S4 supply. And then your service battery was primarily your ammunition train. And you had 3 trains in it, and each train was assigned to one of the firing batteries, A, B, or C. But we had combat loaded ammunition that we carried right with it. And it was the 105 in them days was towed. Prime mover was a deuce and a half truck. And we carried something like 120 rounds, combat load, plus all the grenades and small arms. And when you got in combat, anything you get on that truck could shoot the cannon or a rifle, you carried it too. But basically speaking, a basic load was about 120 rounds for a 105.
How does the projectile fit with the canister on the 105?
How does it fit?
How do they go together? You say they're separate.
Yeah, it's just like a bullet. It's the projectile on 105 is probably around 33 to 35 pounds. Then you get the brass casing. And in that brass casing, how it's your powder and your primer. And it's packed in the same box, but it ain't fixed.
It just slips in there.
It just slips in there, yeah. And it's loosely your boat tail, what is called a boat tail, from your rotating band back to the rear of your projectile. And your rotating band sticks up probably 1/8 of an inch higher than your boat tail and your projectile, and it just slides right down in that brass casing.
So, from Fort Lewis, where'd you go?
From Fort Lewis, I took a lot of other training in between there. We was going to take that 4th RCT and go to Alaska, and so they sent us up to Camp Custer up at Mount Rainier, up in that vicinity, and give us all cold weather indoctrination, and taught us how to ski and how to cross country with toboggans and all that kind of stuff. But then the Korean deal broke out, and they immediately busted up the 4th RCT, and they were still discharging people just on normal. Everything was normal up until it just that quick hit. And they took and made filler troops or augmentation troops out of our 4th RCT. And we went over into the 2nd Division and filled all of the battalions up to combat strength.
2nd Division?
Yeah. That's when we went to the 2nd Division. Then we went to, I can't remember dates, but It was in June. I believe we sailed the 4th of July, or the 5th. It started on the 25th.
That's 1950.
Yeah. And, hell, see, back in them days, we took all of our equipment with us. So we had about 2 weeks to get ready, and we had to put all kind of different types of equipment on our vehicle, like they called them Q-kits, and what it was for deep water and stuff like that. We could forge water with them on loosen halves back in them days up to about 4 feet, 5 feet, as long as you didn't get it where you'd run it into the motor oil, and stuff. But then we got, I believe it was the 21st of July, we hit Busan, Korea, and there's where it all started.
What ship did you go over on?
Funston. It was a merchant ship, controlled by the Navy, run MATS, or whatever they call it. It was run by merchant marines, but it was the skipper was Navy, and it was run by the Navy.
Tell me about the trip over. What happened?
That was a pretty good show. We started over, and of course, the closer we get to Korea, were the more serious things to get. But to start out with, it was a joke. We boarded that ship. We were going to go over there, and in 6 months, we were going to kick hell out of the North Korean Army, which we did in less time than that. We annihilated a 600,000-man army in 3 months with 7 divisions, I believe, with what few stragglers they had left of the South Korean Army. We took 140,000 troops and whooped hell out of 600,000. But we started on that Funston. We got out. Of course, I got in a little trouble. I played a little poker and this, that, and the other, and got in a brig on it. You don't want to do that on a ship. That's a sad mistake.
Tell me about the brig.
Well, what had happened the night before, they told us when we got aboard, our recreation officer told us, said, now, you can play poker, but if you play poker, go up and get the chips out of the day room. They don't call it day rooms on the ship, they call it something else, I forget. But anyhow, as long as we used the chips, we could play. But they didn't want to see no money. So about midnight, well, a bunch of us, we couldn't sleep, so we got in the head, and we posted guards, and how they slipped up on us, I don't have any idea. But we come as playing, and I'd won $700-800, pretty good chunk, and there's a pot out of about $300 there, and they warned us too quick, or too late. By the time they warned us, they'd already called us. But I reached out and grabbed all that money and put it between the legs, put my hat over it. And the old skipper of the ship said, you can just donate that to the chaplain's fund. And I refused. Back in my younger days, I kind of was hard-headed. I wasn't about to give them people $700-800 for the chaplain's fund. So I had to, and I was probably one of the only Army personnel that ever attended the captain's mass, which is like the unit commander gives you in Article 15 now. Well, that skipper, when he's at sea, he's the Lord and Master. He would go so far as to pronounce a death sentence if it's necessary. But I went up the next morning and I reported to him, and he said, you still holding fast on your decision? I said, that's right, sir. He said, well, I'm going to give you 3 days bread and water. But this time, we were about 5 days out. They put us down there, and a brig in the Navy is right up in the bow of the ship, and it's all metal floor, bars, walls, and everything. It's just as slick, nearly as glass, and all that's in there is a mattress. And they strip you down to nothing but your shorts on. It's kind of rough treatment, see. They don't want you to ever want to go back there again. But anyway, you get 3 days bread and water. Give you all the bread you wanted and water to drink. And that was it. And took you out a couple of times for the latrine facilities and stuff like that. But I was in there about 6 to 8 hours and hit a typhoon. The whole ship would come up out of the water, and when it had hit, it'd sound like an artillery battery going off. And when it would go down that way, the old screws would come out. And when they'd hit the water again, well, they'd rattle every bolt in that ship. And I'd give them every nickel I had if they'd let me out then, but they wouldn't talk to you once they give it to you. But I damn sure didn't want to get no brig anymore.
So you said you attended the captain's mass?
Yeah, that's the high point of that little voyage there. You know, we always joked about it. When I knew what Catholic mass was, but the captain's mass, of course, I knew what a captain's mass was because both of my brothers was in the Navy, and I'd been told about it. old man call you up and give you bread and water, well, you was in pretty bad shape until you get out of it. But see that commander of the ship, we had our troop commander, which is a bird colonel, but he couldn't interfere in that. That was strictly Navy business. He didn't want to anyhow, because he wanted us to act like we was gentlemen anyway, see that.
So how long did the trip last?
The best I can remember, it was about 13 days. We was running along about 18 knots an hour, and we didn't stop until we was within sight of Japan, and they slowed down. They was gonna go into port, but instead they got a communicator go straight to Busan, and they shoveled the coal of that old ship and went on and docked at Busan.
Now, Busan is on which coast?
South, extreme south end of Vietnam Peninsula. I believe Vietnam was something like 125 mile wide at the widest, and all triple 100 miles.
Korea?
I mean Korea, yeah. When I said Vietnam. Korea, it was about 125 at the widest, and probably some 300 miles or better long.
So tell me about getting off of Busan. What happened?
Well, we got off at Busan, and of course we went into a staging area, organizational situation. We got all of our equipment unloaded, and the first thing they done, it kind of wasn't too economical as far as I was concerned. They took all of our Class A gear away from us. They piled it up in big old piles before to carry our gasoline and stuff on it and burn it. Every damn thing that was Class A, they done that. All we had left was combat gear.
Why did they burn it?
Well, I guess they didn't want to. I don't have any idea. They didn't have a place to store it. They didn't want to give it to the Koreans. At that time, to me, well, they couldn't afford it to give it out that way, because hell, the enemy would get a hold of it. They do have some of them people that look somewhat similar to us, and you know they could have used it for their advantage. Where we couldn't there, because all of us looks too much alike as far as the skin and stuff. We're 100% different in all phases, you might say. But then we was up there and we done that, and we sat there for 2 days. I thought that the infantry was ahead of us. When we moved out and took up our first firing position.
And what unit were you in this time?
Charlie Battery, 37th Field Artillery, 2nd Division. And the high points of that, I was in the section in the division that fired the first round in combat. Now, I never saw it, but that canister, that 105, is supposed to be in the 2nd Division Museum with all of our names on it and everything. And we moved up and went into position, and the very first combat position we went into, A Battery sat right up the hill, or to our right flank, probably 150, 200 yards, and they got the first counter battery fire. And there was something like 30 of them killed, KI, and it just, well, it deactivated that battery, you might say. It got them pretty heavy. They shifted the fire over to us. We got a short, a long, and the next round come. They'd call fire missions in the meantime. And my section was the only one that responded. And we manned the gun, and around the third round, I assume it's the third round. Do you know how the bracket artillery? They get a long, a short, a left, or a right, and then they put it where they wanted it, about the third round. And that damn round went right in the foxhole, me and this other guy prepared. That made me think that foxhole was obsolete.
How far from where the gun was?
Oh, I wasn't 10 feet from it when it went in it. And it blew me up under the cannon and into a gun, a howitzer, and into the ammo pit. And an hour or something later, I come to myself to where I could talk to people. And this Clarence Wood that we buried down here at Lawton, I guess it was 4 or 5 months ago, he was the chief of section. Well, he thought I shot all the pieces. That gun shrapnel just went through my jacket, field jacket, and fatigue shirt, just made red spots all over me, about like that. He told me, he said, Billy, I think you tore all the pieces, and we're just going to have to look and see. So pull your jacket off. When I went to strip it, that's what we found. A number of places where that shrapnel was went through. So it burnt black marks on the T-shirt. Of course, back in them days, you know, your old T-shirts were old olive drab. And from there, we started the real show. And the outfit I was in made the longest push at that time that the Army had made, spearhead, and I think it was 76 miles, 24 hours. I believe that. I'm saying that right. But all we was doing just running right down the road, jumping off the tank, shooting until we knock out a pocket and we run over more than we killed. Of course, we fought. We paid for it later on because we was running right up the road and they was all around us, you see. But when we got them North Koreans on the run, well, hell, we annihilated them suckers. They wasn't no problem at all. And until November, we went up on the DMZ, what is now the DMZ, and we was all the way up to about the 40th parallel, maybe a little further. But anyway, we was up to within just a few minutes drive or a day or two march with a vehicle. Or if you was marching a couple of days from the Yellow River, which is the borderline between the two countries, Manchuria and Korea. So we set up defensive positions, and then we moved back. We turned all of our ammunition and everything in. The other Chinese hadn't come into it yet. We knew that they was on the Yellow River, and that's when General MacArthur wanted to go on into, while we was running them, keep them going and going into Manchuria. Now MacArthur wanted this. Probably the only time that I can remember him being right all the way. And they relieved him. And I think Ridgeway took over them. We moved up there, and we turned all our ammo in, and a couple of days before Thanksgiving, we'd been sitting down there for a couple of weeks or better. Done got lazy and all we were doing playing cards and pulling maintenance on guns and vehicles. So they come down one night, pick up ammunition. We're going to make a 7-day push and come home. The 61st Artillery, the 1st Division, was already loaded on ships going to Korea, going to Japan to parade for MacArthur on Thanksgiving Day. And the 61st Artillery, the 1st Cavalry Division, pulled up beside of us, and we had to split our combat loaded ammunition with them because they didn't have any. They was both ships there. And when they unloaded and started up north with us, we had to split with them. And now at this time, I was on the Fort Observer team, and we got up on up where we could see the Chinese, and they was thicker than hair on a dog's back. I never saw anything like it. They was walking right down the road, 4 abreast, and they had.
Were they in North Korea at this time?
Yeah, they'd come across. They was across the Yellow River, on the south side of the Yellow River, which they wasn't supposed to be. They were supposed to have been setting up defensive positions up along the Yellow River over hydroelectric stations. But they'd already jumped across the river, and unbeknownst to us, they had infiltrated us. Because the roadblock that we got hit in was 15 miles deep. That's how much we had to, or they had to fight to get out of there. But I was up on the hill. I could tell you some things, but I won't tell you with that camera running.
Let me shut it off?
Yeah. Now, we're not being recorded or nothing. At this time, I was with the 23rd Regiment of the 2nd Division, all white. The 9th Regiment of the 2nd Division was all black. This is the first time they integrated the troops, and I was one of the first to be integrated. And we went up with L Company, the 9th Infantry. And the night that we was hit, that very night we was hit, they wasn't none of them fired. The Chinamen was in and around us and all over us on top of us. And I carried the company commander, a black captain, as far as I could carry him. And he told me, said, Sergeant said, put me down, said, I'll never make it. He said, yeah, I'm a dead weight to you. And of course, you're obligated to try to help you fellow trooper, you know. Well, I got him back and an old house and covered him up with straw and stuff like that. But I never heard any of them shoot. I think I heard one automatic weapon. Now, when you get in combat, you can distinguish the sounds of their weapons and their grenades as opposed to yours. I heard maybe one grenade go off and one automatic weapon open up. Out of the whole company. sure enough, that's one of the big reasons. But really and truly, and there was 503rd Artillery Battalion, which is 155 Hauser. They was all black.
Why did they fire?
I don't know how to answer that. You ought to be able to determine what I told you. They ain't. I hate to say it, but until they integrated like they did, they didn't stay hooked up to good combat. Back in them days, any of your old troopers could tell you that. And I was raised in Oklahoma, but to me, I ain't what you call prejudiced. I believe in a man is a man whether he's black or white. But it was a known fact back in them days when it got nighttime, then people got scared. It's a fact. But they integrated us, and we went on up there, we was up there, and I set up on a hill. Now, like I say, I was on the observation team. We had Lieutenant Raybold, Pardee, Cecil. Now, them two didn't make it back, and Lieutenant Raybold did. And he's from Salt Lake City, Utah. And we set up there, we took up defensive positions, we sent a patrol out. And about an hour later, the patrol come back, and there's only 2 of them made it back. The rest of them got it. And that was the infantry squad back in them days, whatever it was.
What part of Korea were you in?
North Korea.
You were in?
Way up on north of the 40th parallel.
How far from the Yellow River?
10 miles or less. I would guess. I don't know this, but I'd say with 10. There's Choson Reservoir, and I had some paperwork one time that had a diagram of it on there, and I believe it was all somewhere around 10 miles. But we watched those Chinese march 4 abreast right down that road all afternoon and could not fire on them. We called back repeatedly and tried everywhere in the world to get to shoot on them. We could have slaughtered them. But I knew this was something funny because there wasn't no aircraft. Usually when you see an enemy, the aircraft is pretty close on their tail, see. That or artillery ones eating them up back then. And nothing, everything just as quiet except for the troop movement. And that night about 3 o'clock, they went to digging in, and some idiot, they knew where we was at and everything, but some idiot come us to hollering and screaming, "Who are you? We're going to shoot. Identify yourself. We're going to shoot." Hell, anything north of us was enemy. And before they could quieten that joker down, they hit us. And when they hit us on all 4 sides. There was as many behind us and on the left and right flanks as there was in front of us. And they surrounded us, cut us off from all friendly forces, period. I was behind lines for, I guess, 6 or 7 days before I got captured, but you can only go so far without food and water, you know. And I'd picked up 4 other guys as a lieutenant, and I don't have any idea what their names are. They wasn't nobody in my unit. They was either out of that infantry. They was one black guy, and the rest of us were Caucasian. And the lieutenant, I believe, he was out of the 38th Artillery, but I didn't know him. And we resisted as far as we could.
How'd you evade the Chinese?
Well, just hid in the daytime. I laid there a day or two, right all within 50 yards of the road, and they just marched right down the middle of the road. Just a steady stream of them. I forget what the estimated strength of the enemy was at that time, but it was 10 or 15 times more than what we had, Dalton. That was in front of us. Now, what was behind us, I don't have any idea, but that roadblock was 15 miles. So you can figure out about what was going on. They was infiltrating, and we was sitting up there and couldn't shoot at them. So if we could have got artillery in there on them and aircraft, we'd have never got messed up like we did. So then I was captured.
Were you captured or did you surrender?
Captured. Hell yes, they run up on us, and like with 5 of us, and we went so long we hadn't had anything to eat or sleep or nothing. And when I went to sleep, I had my carbine across my chest like that, and only had about 5 or 6 rounds left. And them other people the same way, but we got up in this rock crevice, and we thought we was well hid and everything. Well, we wasn't. The damn Chinese run up in there with a Thompson submachine gun and opened up on us. And how he kept from killing us, I'll never know, but he didn't. And they captured us, and then after that, it was a long walk back to the north. And to my knowledge, there was no no prisoners escaped in Korea. At least that's what they told us.
So where were you captured?
Cooneree.
Where?
A little old town called Cooneree. It was up on the up with the Choson Reservoir.
And
I say Cooneree is. I'd place our position more at the Choson Reservoir than I would any town.
what was your reaction at that point when you were captured?
Well, when you're captured, you're thoroughly confused to begin with, because by the time that we'd stayed behind the lines 3 or 4 days, and everybody's got their own opinion about things, and we'd all separated down. Now we got with one group of troops, and they was probably 300 or 400, and some officer, I don't know what rank he was or nothing, but he hollered and screamed that everybody was on their own, which is a wrong thing to do. Instead of him organizing and fighting out, he said everybody's on their own. Well, they went to gathering up little bunches and hooking it. And at this time, I was with these 4 people. There was 5 of us in the group, and we had run into one another on, by accident, of course. Just picked one another up. But we'd decided that we knew as much about it as everybody else, and so we decided to try to make it on our own. Now we got within a mile of where they was fighting 2 or 3 times, but we couldn't get no further because hell is walking right down the road 4 abreast on us. And the way the Chinese fought back in them days, they'd line one company up on line, fully armed. They'd have 3 or 4 more companies behind, and it wouldn't have nothing but hand grenades and ammunition. And they just, when they jumped off, we call it MLR back in them days, main line of resistance. And when they'd jump off, they'd have that one company armed to the teeth, and the others, as soon as one of them would get killed, they just walk up, pick his weapon up, and keep going. They killed thousands and thousands of them. Artillery, planes, you just couldn't match it. They'd walk right up and take a machine gun out of a man's hand. That's how many there was. While he's burning it up or changing barrels, That's how thick they were. We walked through this valley, and there's probably, sometimes it was from 100 yards to a couple of miles wide, and it was probably 7 or 8 miles long. And I would estimate that there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 40,000 people in there that was dead. Now, that's a lot of people. And you couldn't walk through it without stepping on them. It's like, they'd hit you, there'd be thousands of them, and you'd shoot them with machine guns and artillery and planes. You can imagine about what it would be like. And they'd go along the roads, and they'd throw them off the side of the road. They'd be so damn thick, they didn't even, of course, not run over them and everything, but they'd just drag them off the side of the road to keep going. And I stayed 5 or 6 days, I forget, 7, somewhere in there. But it was somewhere, I say the date of my capture was the 25th of November.
Of
1950. But now, the deal was, it was the day that they fed Thanksgiving dinner to the troops. But I thought it was the 25th. That's the day that I give when they got me back, because that's the night of the 25th which would be the 26th, I guess, if you want to get right down the break. But that's when I lost all contact with American forces and everything. So I give the 25th of November as mine, and that's what's on my record and everything. And then the repatriation part of it was the last day of the repatriation, and it was supposed to be 30 days from the beginning, and I believe it was 30 July, if I remember right.
53. Where did they take you when they captured you?
Well, at first, I'd say November, December, February. The first 3 months, they marched us just from village to village. The first, I'd say, somewhere between 60 and 90 days. We lost all out, it got pretty damn rough. That's when they took us and marched us over these damn. They kept us on the front lines, I think, for about 2 weeks. And we was in places like we named Bean Camp in 12 days, that's 1,205 died there of combat wounds, dysentery, and exposure. And then they just keep us in villages for a day or two, or maybe a week at a time. And they finally got us back to, in the spring of 51, they got us back to a camp called Choctaw. I believe it was Camp 5. And I wish I was better on dates, but I just disregarded all of that stuff.
That's okay. What was the reaction of the villagers to the Americans?
Well, they throw rocks at you, spit on you, and they was confused too. They didn't know. The North Korean, the average North Korean civilian, he was confused. He didn't know what was going on. Of course, they wasn't a highly educated country. You know, most of them was illiterate, but all they'd believe in is what was happening from day to day. And we'd go through villages, or hell, they'd spit on us and throw rocks at us and stuff like that. But nothing that you wouldn't expect to happen in a situation like that. But there's so many things that happened from the time they captured. It would take, I don't know how long it'd take me to tell you what happened from day to day. But the first thing they done, I think their idea was to starve us down. I went from 170 pounds down to 90 pounds.
And how long?
And probably 3 months or less. And then they started what they call the brainwashing program. They started schooling us, so to speak, see. They tried to indoctrinate us. And that was at Camp 5. Then they took what they call the reactionaries, and I was classified as a reactionary. They sorted us out because we was hard cases. We interrupted everything. We wouldn't listen to them. They'd try to tell me that the government wasn't any good, and I just turned my back on them, something of that order. And they sorted 472 of us out, and they made a reactionary camp up on right across the Yalu River. We was in some backwater, but we was right up on the Yalu River. I don't remember going across it unless it was in the wintertime and it was all froze up and stuff. But we could see the other bank. And we was up in what they later called Mig Alley. That's where they had all the dog fights. We every day, if it was sunny and nice, we'd see dog fights. And of course we could tell who was who. And we had several times we'd have them. I think they got up to the F-84, something like that, but they'd come down that valley and give us a victory roll and wave at us, policy. I've had that happen several times. But I was in that reactionary camp, and that's the reason I was one of the last repatriated. And we was the last camp. It was Camp 4. And they took us down, and they kept releasing people, and they had what they called a tent city. And they had, in the area that they had us, there was two great big wooden doors, probably 10 foot high and 12, 16 foot wide. And they had damn padlocks that big around them. So we knew that there was something in there. And a bunch of us went down there and finally wiggled them locks off, and we got in there, and it sure as hell was something. It was like medical supplies. And there was tons of that stuff, and stuff that we hadn't heard of. Like terramycin and stuff, you know, penicillin. Well, they had penicillin, but I think terramycin, oramycin, some of that stuff. But it was all medicine, and so we'd go in there and take turns and do what damage we could. And we'd probably done thousands of dollars worth of damage. And I was considered what they call a gang leader, of course, and they picked me and these other 4 guys out. And they had to more or less negotiate right on the DMZ for our repatriation. And when I jumped off the truck, it was a Lieutenant General White, and he was from Oklahoma City. He asked me where I was from, and I told him, and he escorted me up to where they debugged us and give us a change of clothes and stuff. And all I can remember is his name is Lieutenant General White.
So you were in this medical supplies, what, were you just destroying stuff?
Just destroying. Just went in there and took a club and beat it and kicked it and whatever it took to destroy it. Yeah, well, no, they didn't catch us. But they had a pretty good idea who it was anyway. And they was all the way down to about the last, 400 or 500. And the later part of it. See, I don't remember the statistics, but I think it was something like 1 out of 4 of those made it back. It was captured.
What type of food they give you in those camps?
Well, the first, to start with, the first meal they give me was 2 sweet potatoes boiled in water. And then it would be like whole kernel corn, just boiled in water, millet. They use millet for birdseed back here in the States. It's a stock feed, and they make some kind of food for humans. But over there, it was they just boil it in hot water, and maybe once in a while some salt. And later on, now everybody thinks we eat a lot of rice, but we'd get rice once, twice a month sometimes, until the negotiations. We could tell how the negotiations was going by the way they treat us. They'd go along and they'd get pretty good to us once in a while, and they'd feed us a little meat and a little green vegetables, and then if it got to going rough, they'd chop all of that off, back down to the basic. And I believe we had a little old bowl, 400 grams, I don't remember the units of measure, but it was about so big around, about that deep, and that was your ration for the day. Probably cooked, might have been 8 ounces. But they had it, of course, they had it down in grams and stuff like that. And whatever you could steal or trade for and stuff like that. See. We played poker for food.
What was your average day in the camp?
Average day.
Yeah, from the time you got up until you went to bed.
Well, there was a lot of, in the camp that I was in now, we was reactionaries, and they would try to keep us busy on details of the sort. And they'd have us going getting firewood. They'd have us. They got mad at us one time and made us dig a football field out the side of a mountain. When we started out, it was probably 6 inches deep. When we got through, it was 40 foot high. But they'd done that because we wouldn't listen to them. They'd try to give us that old brainwashing stuff, and they'd get us out. And they fixed up classrooms. They'd set logs up outside, or if it was cold and stuff, once in a while they'd take us inside. But when they'd get up on this end and go to give an instruction, we'd just turn around and face 180. They'd get over here, we'd face another 180. Nothing violent. There's my dog. He's done back. But we wouldn't listen to them. As an example, they wanted us to write our autobiographies. Okay, when I got through with mine, we owned the Washita River bottom, and we wasn't nothing dirt poor people all my life. And then they like the Stockholm Peace Appeal. I don't know if you've heard of that or not.
The what?
Stockholm Peace Appeal back in them days, and they made us sign that. Well, when I went up to sign it, I put Gene Autry. And those guards, the instructors could speak English. They was trained here in the States at Austin and University of Oklahoma, all over. They spoke as good English as we did. But the average one there, we knew who couldn't speak English. And when we walked up to sign that, we just put Gene Autry or Buck Jones or something like that. Well, a month later, they'd see what was going on. They'd get it back to somebody that was educated and reviewed it, and they'd get mad as hell and make us sign it again. Well, when they would, I'd sign some other name. And stuff like that. They just harassed them all the time we was there. See? We couldn't escape. Well, we escaped. I escaped 4 or 5 times, but I'd get maybe 1 or 2 days out, and that'd be it, because you could not carry the rations that you'd have to escape. All Korea was mountains, and big ones. They wasn't no little mountains. They was all big ones. And the only thing you could steal to escape with would be rice, and you'd have to build a fire to cook it. I don't know what would happen if you'd eat it raw and drink some water, I guess. But rice or corn or millet or something like that, and you just couldn't no way. And like I say, even if you was American Indian or a Mexican, we were still enough different than people that you just couldn't disguise yourself. You couldn't camouflage.
What kind of buildings did you have to stay in?
They were made out of mud and straw. The last camp that I was in, the building, I believe, was 33 feet wide and 66 feet long.
How many men inside?
And it had, probably 75
And what type
to
of
90.
bed?
They built up platforms out of old rough, huge boards. They wasn't slick, and they just solid. You know what I'm talking about. They built platforms, just left a walkway down the center of them, and that's what we slept on. So. They're just old rough timber. They went out and cut poles out of the timber and took up and stuck them in the ground and built. The roofs was made out of rice straw and mud floors.
Have a mattress or anything to sleep on?
No, they give us an old quilt, a comforter of a sort. It was a cotton padded sort of a deal. Kindly, well, if you take these sleeping bags and the one that's got two parts, you know, and they kind of look like one side of the road, and then a blanket, and then they later, after about 51 and 52, the winter of 51, 52, they give us a cotton padded uniform, and it was warm. It was a big old heavy thick cotton padded job.
Before that, what they give you?
Nothing. Well, they give us a little old light summer uniform. It was just about like a bed sheet. And the shoes was, of course, were a tennis shoe or a rubber type shoe. No way you keep warm in them. But they was some of us. Hell, we managed to trade, and like I say, we played poker for chow and stuff like that, and we'd trade for stuff like that. And I had a pair of fatigues, them old HBTs, herringbone 12. I had a suit of fatigues that I was captured in. I made it all the way through with it. You didn't wear them out; they'd get white. You'd wash them so much. But I had them, yeah. And now they give us an old blanket, and that was about it. And that comforter type deal, of course. Now they wasn't nothing thought about 2 or 3 people sharing one of them, you know. Wasn't nothing thought about it. You slept just like cordwood, and that's about how close you were, just as close as that you could lay. Now that's another thing. When they first captured us, when they put us in a room, if the room was this size, they'd put 50 in. You'd have to sleep in reliefs, you know, and stuff like that. I saw them just stack them into where they'd be just close together. All you could do is just squat down. A lot of people smothered to death, in fact. They'd get down and I saw a lot of guys just give up. They just say, hell with it, I'm through. And wake up the next morning, they'd be dead. And Chinamen would come in there every morning. They'd say, how many's dead this morning? And then you'd start out with probably 10 or 12 dead in a compound where there'd be 70, and they'd get out to where there's, and lice and stuff like that was killing them, and all the diseases they had back there.
What time would you get up in the morning at camp?
Oh, it's about like military life, probably 6 o'clock, and then you could sleep all day or whatever you wanted to do if you wasn't on detail. But they always had something barrel detailed, like the first year, of course, it was the first winter was hell. It was detailed, barrel detailed every day. At one camp, right after we was captured there, they was in 12 days. There's 1,205 died, and most of them we just carried out and laid out in the bank of snow. And we got back to Camp 5. They took details and went up and dug holes in the snow and buried them in mass graves. You know, like every day they'd dig a hole, and whatever died that night, that's what would be buried in that one hole.
The bodies retrieved, they're still there?
Now I imagine that most of them by now is already washed down the river, because in the spring, when the spring thaw come, animals moved the skeletons, you know, their names, and we actually saw them washing down. You know how the monsoons are in Korea, and they'd wash them all. Cause they wasn't done. It's laying right on top of the ground. They just buried in a snow drift. That's right. They mounted them. We tried to mark their graves and bury them with their dog tags on, what had them, and this, that, and the other. You know how GIs are. They run out. Can we take a little break now?
Sure.
And like on them marches, there's a number of things that a man could. A funny thing, see, there's a lot of them Chinamen never saw a black person. And the very first time they let us wash, they brought a wooden bowl out, probably 6 foot around and about 6 inches deep. They filled it up with water and put a bunch of soap out, old lye soap like your mother. I don't know if your mother ever made any or not. Well, the first ones they took out was the blacks. And they'd get through and they'd start back in. They'd know, wash you. And one of the old boys turned to me and said, would you tell this stupid, you know, that I'm black? That's why I'm supposed to be that. They actually thought they were supposed to wash all white like we was. and little things like that. And I got so damn hungry, they put us in the shack one night. And I had to go to the bathroom. I went outside. They let you out one at a time. There's 2 chickens sitting up there. Hey, little bitty, about the size of a benny. And I pinched one of them chickens' heads off and eat it blood raw. That's how hungry. Just pulled the feathers off of it and eat it. I got it.
Go ahead.
Well, what we'd do, we'd go down there to unload that, whatever it was, it being like probably the being measured, they went by was kilos, but it would probably be in excess of 100 pounds each bag would be. And this barge would be 100 foot long, 150 foot long, 30 or 40 foot wide. And we'd have to have people help us with that. Probably take 3 people, one to carry it to the hole in the bush, as weak as we was then. But we got to noticing that that old barge would come out and go back. And it tied up, loose enough, that it would go out as much as 2 or 3 feet. And they'd post them guards right along the edge of it like that. Well, when we'd come to one of them, we just ease into him and act like we stumbled and all that. There he'd go, and chances was he'd get squashed. He'd never make the tank out of that. Some of them did. If it was deep enough, he might go plumb to the bottom and that's how fell or something like that. But I don't know how many Chinese we knocked off between that barge and that before they realized what we was doing. And then we moved from there over to the other, about midship, they moved going through that. But the gangplanks across the hole. So. But the thing you got, of course, your Oriole mine is it's a mystery of its own, really, if you get right down to it. They tend to think about one thing at a time. If you wanted to steal something, they put a Chinese out there, guard, and tell him to watch just one certain thing. You ain't gonna touch that. But whatever else laying around there, he didn't pay no attention to. If you wanted, you just walk up and get it and walk off. You couldn't give them general orders. You know what I'm talking about? They was counting, we called it one-track mind. Because if we wanted to steal something, one of us elected to be the guinea pig, just walk up and pick it up and walk off. Well, if it worked, everybody there would go back and get whatever they wanted to see. Because we'd have to find out what he was guarding. They'd put us on details where it would be food involved, and we'd just steal a bunch of stuff. Because they'd be paying attention to one thing. They wouldn't, anything else going around, and they'd ignore it.
Tell me about the interrogation again.
Well, see, they called us in, they'd interrogate us. Of course, the first few days, they wanted to know all about your friendly forces, the outfit you was in, and all of that. And now this is before we had a code of conduct. We didn't have a code of conduct on capture. Had a Geneva Convention card we carried, and that was it. And all you were supposed to give the enemy was your name, rank, and serial number. That was it. No more, no less. But after you've been captured for 6 months or so, well, or maybe 30 days or 2 weeks, you can tell them what unit you was in or something, because they're not there anymore, they're gone, stuff like that. You got to use your head on your interrogations and stuff. But what we kept them thoroughly confused, because if they go to interrogate one of us, we'd go back and tell everybody what the questions they asked us. So the next guy went up, he'd be ready for it. We'd know to either keep our mouth shut or just keep building to it, or whatever. Like I say, we built that airplane. It took us probably 2 months to do that, but I'll tell you what, for a week after we got through it, they found out we were just snoring. Well, it's hard to live with it now.
What they do then?
Oh, hell, they'd get mean. You'd have to go right down to toe the line with their instructions and stuff like that. I got caught stealing eggs one time, and you see, they believed if you'd confess your crime, that they'd let you go a lot of times. But anyway, I got caught stealing eggs, and the only ones that got eggs issued was the Chinese officers. They got mad as hell about that. But they decided they let me write a confession. And I wrote a confession. I titled it "The Egg and I," which was a movie maybe. When I got up before all of them, I said, well, I was a bad boy today. I got caught stealing from the Chinese, and my confession's titled is "The Egg and I." I can just read it off. Of course, everybody out there just hooting and hollering. And I didn't get to read but about a paragraph or two, they run me back in rank because I done made an ass out of it. why they're not. And that's one of the reasons they give me the title of a reactionary.
You said they put a rock on top on your shoulder?
Yeah, they put you in a kneeling position, your head like so, and they put maybe a 20-pound rock between your shoulder blades and stuff like that. There's all kinds of things. They never just outright, I never had them to beat you with a club or nothing like that. They put you in a damn room, and there's no light in it, and they set a bucket of water over the corner with a drop. And, you know, you stay in the dark for about a week, you got a tendency to go stone blind. It takes you a while to get your senses back to you. Of course, the Chinese invented torture, and, you know, everybody knows this, and they was experts at it. And they didn't have to kill you, although they would go to extremes once in a while and they'd kill them.
What would be a capital?
Huh?
What would be?
Well, it could start out as nothing, like we'd be joking with them or something. I tell you, whenever they negotiations, it would be going good. We could tell it. And whenever the final days of it, this Chinese platoon leader come down through there. Now he was a good trooper. He really was. He was a Chinese and everything, but he was a soldier, and he done soldier duty, and we respected him. He come down through there, and I said, "Platoon leader, the war's over." Boy, he stopped, just locked all four up, and where'd you hear that at? I said, "All over bird told me." What? I said, "Oh, bird told me." He'd come to me. We didn't know it, but it already had been settled, you see. And then just by accident, I looked up and said the magic word. Well, hell, they interrogated me for about 3 days on that deal right there. And, of course, all I done out of just harassed him. The war's over. How do you know? I said, well, the bird told me. They want to know where that damn bird comes from and all that, you see.
And you,
Oh, different type of work details they had you doing in the camp.
Well, they had the regular details that was necessary to run the camp, like your KP or cooks and stuff. We had they had a Chinese supervisor, but they had own GI cooks, and that probably in that last camp I was in, I'd probably be better to reiterate on that was. They was feeding like 472, and they'd have probably 6 GI cooks and 2 Chinese supervisors. And then they'd have the wood details, and they'd have their little area beautification details. Later on, they had camouflage details where we'd go out and cut green stuff and put on, and then they come up. They finally painted red crosses on them. We didn't have to do that anymore. But initially, we had to keep our camps camouflaged and everything until the negotiations got it settled where they would mark the PW camps and stuff. Just general details, general medial type work details, you know. And about a month before cold weather, they'd start taking us up in the mountains to get wood for the winter and stuff like that. We'd have to cut our own wood and everything, and plus the wood for them would actually, you know, run their headquarters and stuff.
Oh, I was going to ask you, why would the Chinese execute a prisoner?
To my knowing, I don't think the Chinese ever executed
But
a
the
prisoner.
North Koreans.
But the North Koreans did. The North Koreans did. See?
Why would they
Well,
execute a prisoner?
they just get they had I don't know they had this Chinese or Korean major, they called him the Tiger, and he executed people, shot them up full bunches and stuff. He stood a lieutenant up on a big rock from probably in excess of 50 and shot him because a guy tried to escape, and he made this lieutenant responsible for the group. And it could be just a fit of anger. And they was walking down the road, he walked up and shot one. Then a few minutes later, he come back, shot another, just walking up the road. He's crazy, you know. That's what we thought. But he was a North Korean now. He wasn't, to my knowing, the Chinese never killed anybody unless it was they put them in a damn basement of them old wooden straw houses, and there'd be mud and stuff down in there, and leave them in there too long or something, and they'd get pneumonia or whatever kind of disease, and that would kill them. But as far as shooting them or killing them with a stick or something, to my knowing, they didn't do that. Now they'd get mad, and I'll tell you what, they just wanted everything their way, but they wouldn't go to the extreme of shooting. They was trying to brainwash us, is what they was trying to do. And that brainwashing was what they was trying to tell us was our type of government wasn't worth a damn. We'd been took advantage of all of our lives, this, that, and the other, and especially the blacks. See?
The guards in the prison camps, are they good, bad, mediocre?
You could compare them with our guards. You'd run into some mean ones, and then you'd run into some pretty good old boys. They'd give you a cigarette or anything. Just before I was captured, it was a pretty good while, I was still with the 23rd Regiment. We had a medic. You know, medic didn't pack weapons back in them days and stuff like that. Still not supposed to. But he sent home and got him a pair of 38s, Smith & Wessons. We captured 3 or 4 North Koreans, and they'd been hit with white phosphorus. We had them down in an old house pit and had a guard on them. And I don't know if you've ever seen anybody hit with WP or not, but it just eats holes in you like life. And these old boys was in pain, and he was supposed to go down in and take care of their combat wounds. When you capture a prisoner, he surrenders. He's supposed to be afforded all your facilities. And instead of that, he decided he'd jump down in there and kick them around and talk. Of course, they didn't understand what he was saying, but he was cussing them and kicking them. I walked up to him and flipped an M2 carbine on full automatic and told him if he kicked him that again, I was going to kill him. But see, that's an example of the way some of theirs would be. See? We had the same thing, but there was enough of us that wouldn't tolerate it. It wasn't too widespread. Yeah, old boy, he's going to be Wild Bill Hickok. He had him a pair of 38s, boy, and of course he was a medic. He wasn't even supposed to be armed. Nobody said nothing about it, of course, you know. They shoot at them Red Crosses just like they do anything else. But I figured when he went to kicking that old boy, he was at our mercy. We could do anything we wanted to, and I couldn't see maltreatment.
What was your worst experience in the prison camp?
Worst experience in a prison camp. I don't know, but I'll tell you what, it wasn't in a prison camp, it was just in a Korean hut. But I'll tell you, right after we was captured, I was walking down the road and I found a piece of canvas. It was probably, say a 6 by 8. And when we got into this Korean hut this night, this old boy, these 2 guys asked me could they share that tarp. That's all we had, see. And when I was captured, it was awful cold. All I had was a field jacket and fatigue pants and shirt, shirt, and snow packs. You know what the old snow packs were?
What's that?
Snow packs, we call them. There's the old all this Arctic.
The boots.
Arctic boots.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And of course that was the worst thing in the world I could have had on to do walking in. But anyway, that's what I had on it, and I found that tarp, and these boys wanted to sleep with me. And I said, yeah, but there's one stipulation: I get to sleep in the middle. I knew damn well I could stay warm by the way. See, you're always thinking about you first, self-preservation, first law of nature, always in situations like that. So they agreed, and about 3 o'clock the next morning, the little boy on the right, he pulled all of that cover off of me and this other guy. I don't even know who they were. Don't know their names or nothing. Just 2 guys I run into at that time. And I pulled it off, and I thought something was funny. I reached over and felt it, and he was dead. But I went ahead and wrestled that cover off of him, and I covered me and this other guy up. By that time, I'd woke him up. And of course, we was tired. We just, whenever we'd hit the ground, we'd just sleep. And it wasn't long, probably an hour and a half after that, the same thing happened to him, and he died. And that was in the wee hours of the morning, see, and that got me to thinking, boy, am I next? Am I gonna, is this the end of the road? That's the closest I think I ever come to really thinking I was out of the show, you know. But as far as any one incident in the camp, this old boy, I think he's still alive. We amputated a guy's leg with no kind of anesthetics, with a damn handsaw and a mess kit knife. And we all held him down. They was a doctor. He was either a doctor or a medic. And it was in Camp 5 where this happened. And we amputated his leg. And whenever they had two repatriations. They had a little switch and a big switch, they call it. The little switch, all the handicapped people and medical cases, they let out. They let this guy out. Well, we figured he'd be the one. And we hollered that leg out. And took and put messages or real special things we wanted to get out of that PW camp. And a couple of days after this out, they run a bombing raid up there, and we knew where we had the suspicion that it was ammo dumps and stuff like that. And that was another time them Chinamen got mad as hell for about 2 weeks of us, because them planes come in there at, boy, just about treetop level. The night before, they come in, dropped bombs that had cellophane, not cellophane, but aluminum foil. And the Chinese tried to tell us that that was germ warfare. But we knew that it was messing up the radars, what they were doing, or attempting to. But them planes come in, and they just bombed the devil out of things. And all it was that aluminum foil. And the next day, here come the bombers in. And boy, I tell you what, it burned up on that Yellow River for 2 weeks after that. They really laid the eggs up there that day. And them Chinamen, of course, they come around telling us how good they was to us, and we still get done that. Well, anybody's got any sense, you're supposed to resist as long as you have the will and everything. You're supposed to fight them, and that's what we was doing.
Now, how did you haul the leg out? What?
With knife.
I mean, just the stump of the leg, or?
No, we made him a peg leg.
Oh, a peg leg. Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
We made him a peg leg and just a regular stump like they used to make, and hollered that sucker out and fixed it where we could put messages down there in it.
So that was an ammo dump up there that they hit?
It had to be, because hell, it burnt for 2 weeks after that happened. So the Chinese got highly aired about that.
What did they do to you then?
I just buckle down and do the routine like they're supposed to, you know, and stuff like that.
Tell me the story again about the 2 canteens.
Well, it was they was interrogating me, and I don't know what they was interrogating me about at this time, but I got to looking around, and there's just a table and a chair in the room, 2 chairs rather, and I looked up on the wall, and there's 2 canteens. And of course, whenever we'd run into a sticky situation, and I wouldn't answer them and stuff, or they'd get mad and run out or something. No, I got to noticing them canteen. I got up and checked it, and they was full of soju, and it was about equivalent to our Wildcat, about 70% or so alcohol. Well, I was in that interrogation room probably for about 4 hours. And after a while, I didn't give a damn what they asked me, because I'd done tipped that jug too many times. And of course, after they realized that what I'd done, they threw me out in the yard and hollered for them to come and get me. But it was some little old mess. They want me to tell on somebody about stealing something, you know. They'd try every once in a while. They'd call you up and they'd want you to rat on your buddy and this, that, and the other. And that's what I was telling you a while ago, those 21. They wasn't the only ones that done that. They was just the ones that was marked. We had them marked. If they'd have got out of it, if the government hadn't done something about it, they couldn't have never been at peace, because they would never know when they'd run into one of us or something.
What did the government do to them?
Well, they finally all come back, and I think they probably dishonorably discharged them. And they come back 1 or 2 at a time, and the last track I had, they'd all come back except one, I think. But some of them took Chinese wives and all that stuff. So they give them Chinese wives. Of course, that was just like going downtown and buying a sack of flour, say. over there they do things like
And you were repatriated in what day? Do you remember the date of your?
that. No, if I knew the days that it was 30 years, and I could look it up probably
That's
on the
okay.
records.
That is in 53.
53 is it's 33 months and 3 days from the 25th of November. What day would that make it? We can figure that up. It won't take but a minute. There's a simple method. Do you know the
Let me see.
formula? I was
Be
captured
3 years
November
and-
the 25th, 1950, and I spent 33 months and 3 days.
Well, that would be 33 months.
Yeah, that puts you up to the 33 months and 3 days I could always remember, but the dates I couldn't.
Be around August of 53.
Okay, it was July the 30th. Imagine. July the 30th, because from the day they started, they had 30 days to repatriate everybody. Now I'll tell you, there's still a lot of people missing over there. But there's no way, with me being one of them and knowing exactly what happened, there's no way that I could go there and point out where people are at. Because all them people that I carried on up on the burial details, I had no idea who they was, or nothing else. If they had a dog tag on, we left it on. And we tried to mark the graves, we tried to mark them, we'd take a board and stuff and write their names and stuff on it and put it on their chest. But when spring thaw come, like I say, we saw bodies or skeletons floating down the river and stuff. Animals, hogs, dogs would retrieve it, see. But there's still prisoners missing in Korea. I'm satisfied there's still MIAs in Korea. There's never been a war that they ain't some left over, even in Europe. But as far as ever finding them people, they will never find them. And if they did find them, their mental capacity would be so deteriorated that they wish they wouldn't find them, you see. You stay in like them old boys that stayed in that Vietnam deal for 7 or 8 years. Of course, me, I'll never be the same as I was before I was captured. You can't expect anybody. You go through too many mental changes. To begin with, I was a kid. I spent my, let's see, it was in 53, so I spent my 18th, or 19th, 20th, 21st, and 22nd birthday in prison. Can you future a kid doing that nowadays, that age? See? But back in them days, and back on further, back into the Civil Wars and stuff like that, hell, they had 12, 15-year-old kids. If they could carry a damn rifle and shoot it, they could be a soldier, see? So, I never had any teenage life. All of mine was spent with grown men doing a grown man's job. And if I'd shoot and get shot at, it ain't a grown man's job.
So when you see your first American?
You mean when I got out?
Yep.
Well, that lieutenant general was the first one I spoke to.
And where were you repatriated?
At the Panama John. But Lieutenant General White, I imagine he, of course, he was getting up there then. He was probably in his 50s, as Lieutenant General, so the chance of him being alive now is probably slim. But he was from Oklahoma City. And he married up with me, and he said, "Soldier, what would you like to have?" And I said, "Well, the first thing, I want to get a good bath and everything, and then something to eat." He said, "Well, what about ice cream?" I said, "No, just some good food." So, well, they had a mess hall set up at 8057 ASU unit, and they had about 6 or 8 entrances. You can walk in any one of them 24 hours a day and get whatever you want to eat. Each one of them was cooked a certain group of food. And I walked in, the old cook said, "Soldier, so what would you like to eat?" I said, "The biggest T-bone steak you got in the place." He brought me one I know it weighed 2 pounds. And he said, "How do you want it?" And I told him the potatoes and the salad and this, that, and the other. And you know, he got through cooking that thing and they served it to me, and I took about 4 bites of it. That's all. But I took it back to him. I said, "Hey, you put that sucker in your cooler, because I'm going to be back at the fall. I'm going to eat that steak." And it took me all day from about noon on till into the wee hour or into the afternoon to to eat that steak. Your stomach's, what happened to draw it, you see, shrank. But I finally got to where I could eat a full meal, and everything got to being all right. Although I didn't get any weight to speak of until I was back in the States for about 2 years, and then I went to pick it up. Then when I did go pick it up, I blew out.
Yeah. When did you return to the States?
In September that year, 53.
And you came back on what ship?
We
Was it a hospital ship or was it a regular ship?
I think it was. No, it's a regular ship. They like to have a damn right aboard that ship because we was the last load leaving there. Let me see. I want to say the John Black, but I don't remember for sure.
Turn this over.
But anyhow, it was a. Now, I realized later why that they wanted us to go to ship. There wasn't too many come back to ship. But they was quite a few of us, but we was what was considered reactionaries. Okay, there had to be a reason for us being that way. Or are we a stronger willed or something than most of them? Because we had the stories that they wanted. But it had got out to the military, and they had troops that was returning to the States. And they had a little old guy there. He was about 20 years old. He was a sergeant first class, and I asked him who his division commander was, and he couldn't even tell me. And he was a sergeant first class, about 20, 21 years old. I was unheard of. I was just plumb out left field. The only thing young we had back in the 50s was second lieutenants. We went through them like, well, I can't say it, but we went through them pretty fast. A second lieutenant in combat's worth about 15 seconds. All that, they make observers out of it, what they, in the artillery, that's where they go. But anyway, this one was out on deck, and it was a nice sunny day, and we loaded up and getting ready to get underway, and they had us roped off. God damn, that didn't sit good with us now. We didn't know what the hell was going on. But anyhow, they was wanting to interrogate us, and they didn't want us to get out amongst them other people. And that just didn't sound right. Hell, I've been away for damn near 3 years, and I wanted to know who won the pennant and all that kind of stuff, you know. But anyhow, one of those jokers made a damn mistake of saying, well, we didn't want to talk to them commies nohow. That was a serious mistake. Because we treated them some bitches. Excuse me. We treated them. We kept them below ship, and they had to come up with armed troops, and they finally got us settled down and explained things. But it got pretty hairy, and what it was all about was we was the last ones repatriated, and they knew that we probably knew something that the others didn't, and it wound up being just that. You know, I made I don't know how many statements against them people that stayed back and other people, but it was around between 20 and 25, I'd say, that I made sworn statements on. Then after that, I got back to the States and got off the ship. I wasn't off the ship 30 minutes last when we were heading back to Oklahoma. That was wrong. They should have put us in the hospital or something. And I didn't know that my daddy had died. And when I found that out, I stayed drunk for about a year after that. Well, I didn't know nothing now. I was going to come into a little money enough to fix me and him up in a little business and stuff, and I'd had enough time to think about the situation. You know, like me, I hadn't done him right. I was pretty mean to a troublemaker when I was a kid, you might say. In fact, that's the reason I went to the military. I realized that I had to get into something that would control me that I couldn't control myself. That's really why I went in. And when I got back and found out he was dead, of course, hell, there wasn't nothing. I just decided to live it up.
Did you get all your back pay and everything?
Oh yeah, I run through 2 or 3 cars. Yeah, I done like everybody else. Like I say, I stayed loaded pretty well. There's an old boy, Don Jones. He used to be the security major over here at Lex Center, Penitentiary. He and I was prisoners together. And he, when we got out, well, he was my first sergeant for a little while, and we was in the military police down in Sill together. I had to get out of that. That was a bad scene, the military police work.
His name is Don Jones.
Don Jones, yeah. And he lives over in the Lexington area. He's getting up in, Don's probably in his middle 60s now, or he's in his 60s. He wasn't a prisoner as long as we was. He was probably only a prisoner about 15 months.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't meet him until we got up there in Tent City to be repatriated. And I met him. Of course, he was from Pauls Valley, and me being from Wynnewood, for about 6 weeks or so, we got pretty well acquainted. And I didn't see him no more till I got out of Tinker, retired out of Tinker, and I was messing around. I decided to go back to work, and I drove by that penitentiary over there one day. And I thought, well, I'll just drive in here and see what's going on. And I did, and the first one I saw was Don Jones. And they had an old captain that was, he was old as I am now, about 55, I guess. And he was Don was a security major, and Captain Smith was I forget the title of his position. But old Don just had to have me to come to work for him. And I worked in the corrections department for all 4 years, I guess.
The rest of your military career after Korea, you just trained folks mainly, or what?
No, I was artillery. I was in on some pretty good assignment. I went to from 54, I went back into the artillery, and I went to the 553rd down at Fort Sill. That's where this he's a lieutenant colonel now, retired, old Charlie Boyle, and Witt, chief of section I had when I was in the gun section there in Korea in 1950. And I went from that to this 8-inch howitzer outfit. I went back to the 36th Artillery, and it was a 155 Long Tom outfit. Then I went from there, I went to Germany and stayed 3 years. I completed 7th Army NCO Academy, which was Little West Point to the Army. And I don't know if it still is or not, but it's in Munich when I went to it, and it had a sign right up over the gate that said Little West Point. And it said the best non-commissioned officer in the world passed through this gate. And if you didn't graduate, you didn't go back out through that gate. They took you back out through the pasture. That's right. I got that. I graduated there. I was 5th in leadership and 23 academics. I missed automatic promotion by about 5 steps there. But anyway, I went through that, and once you go through the 7th Army Academy, you didn't have to worry about the whole NCO school all the time you was in. And I come back to the States. I was again assigned to Fort Sill. I went on the 4th Army Rifle Team. I went down to Fort Benning and took marksmanship training down there for about 3 months. But I was in artillery all the time. It was just TDY duties and stuff. I come back to Fort Sill, and I was when I come back to Sill, they sent me to AIT, artillery training, and then I got promoted. And they shipped me from there. It's in 62 now, and I went from there to Fort Raleigh, Kansas, 1st Infantry Division, and that's when the Berlin Wall was up. And we went into Berlin. I was there. Of course, it was a 6-month stint there. And that artillery outfit that fired the sloop for Kennedy, that was my unit. Fired the sloop for Kennedy. And then we come out of there, and I went back to Korea. I didn't have to, but I wanted to. It was a year stay, and I wanted to. And I come out of there, I went to Korea, and I got assigned to an Honest John outfit.
What did you think about Korea when you went back?
Well, it went from nothing to riches. Because when I first got over there in 50, there was only like 25 miles of blacktop road in the whole South Korea. And in 1963, when I went back over, they had high-rise buildings, and they had blacktop roads, and they was no more seeing these Josons wearing the old wraparound kimono type made out of toe-sack material dresses. They was wearing Sears and Roebuck, Montgomery Ward, like that. And it was not the same. It was altogether different. We'd already put enough money in there that they was all living good and everything. And I had a friend, Sergeant McKay. He retired, and he married. He was a black guy. He married a silk exporter's daughter, and he lived in a mansion in Seoul. And every weekend I was up there messing around them. They had the family type baths and all of that. And me and him, I'd go up and pick him up once in a while and come back down to DMZ and stuff like that. But usually I'd go to his house because he had about a half acre compound there and had the public bathhouse stuff and all that stuff. And all that kind of. But there's no comparison. I went up out far to Honest John Rocket out of Spoonville. Out of the 1st Cavalry Division. And let me show you.
Okay.
Well, that's just
Yeah.
pictures.
I'm going to get a cup of coffee.
Yeah. I'll show you one picture here. I picked it up the other day. I don't know why. Where's that booger at? Oh, yeah. That's old General Leonard here, and that's me,
Yeah.
and this is my gunner right here. And we're the only two that qualified for expert artillery gunnery. And
You're in the 1st Cav Division then at the same time.
at this time, in
Yeah.
'63. And old General Leonard asked me, he said, how come your gunner made a higher score than you did? I said, because he does what I tell him. And he like to fell over. Yeah, he said, I told him, I said, yeah, well, he does. He made a higher score because he does what I tell him.
What about the Cuban Missile Crisis?
No, I was home on leave. Now, that was when Kennedy got assassinated. Where was I at during that Cuban? I was in Europe.
Yeah, and Berlin, that was 62.
That's when I went up to the 1st Division. We reactivated it, yeah. But then we went into Berlin. See, yeah, we maneuvered for 3 months and then went into Berlin and stayed 3 months.
Mm-hmm. Any other experiences in the prison camp? You can
Well, there's thousands of them. Fighting, we used to do that that's where I got so rowdy with my fist, I guess. I got pretty good with them. There was an old boy that threatened me. I whooped him pretty good in the PW camp, and whenever we got out, and he was on the ship coming back. He was from New York, and them old boys up in there is pretty rowdy. And he told a bunch of them on the ship that he was going to take me out on deck, tear me up. Because he never done it. I went and challenged him on the situation. And I told him, I said, we go out on deck, one of us ain't going to make it back to the States. It's going to be that simple. I done whooped him pretty heavy in the PW. But we fought every day just for harassment, just not harassment, but recreation money. We'd fight, and I mean be serious about it, and 5 minutes later, we'd be friends again. And we had all kind of things going on. We was organized. After we got back before we knew what was going on and could do a little organizing, well, we was organized to the point we kept something going on with the Chinese harassing them continuously. And we played pinochle, and we played a little poker, and we'd bet on anything. Get 2 crickets and put them in a bowl and bet on them. Do you ever do it? You ever see? Well, that's just things that you do, buddy. You know, and we call it a groundhog. Not a groundhog, but you call them chipmunks back here in the state. Well, the worst thing you could do is mess with that chipmunk. People would kill you, you know. We got hold of 2 old dogs, and we brought one of them back. I got pictures of him here. And he wound up down at Wichita Falls, Texas. A guy by the name of Stone got him, kept him. Of course, he's got to be dead now. But he brought him back to the States and stuff like that. And we had a heck of a time getting him on that ship. They wasn't going to let him on the ship. You know? It was almost a riot again because that dog was going or we wouldn't. But we done anything, and you'd be surprised how much a person can think of to harass people about. We'd start in and we have tore like we'd sit out on a porch or something or other, and we'd start picking at it. Before you know it, we'd have the whole thing tore down, just to harass the Chinese. And they probably wouldn't catch us until the roof went to falling down on them, and stuff like that.
What was the most common form of harassment you did to the Chinese?
Well, probably lie. Just start something, start a rumor. We had a communication network between camps too. We knew what was going on from one camp to the next.
How'd this work?
Well, there was always some kind of a movement, and they'd ship a guy in from one camp to another and back and forth. And they was some of them old. They were civilians. They wasn't Chinese, and I don't know if there's Koreans or Chinese or Mongolians, but they hauled supplies in out of Mongolia to the Chinese army on mule carts, and they'd come in and we'd slip notes to them and stuff, and it would be, we got to noticing it would be the same ones every time, every time, and of course we'd get friendly with them and stuff, and we had 2 or 3 of them that would carry notes for us and stuff like that.
So was the treatment in the other camps about the same as
No,
your camp?
no. Basically, I guess it probably could be considered to be the same. But we was 472 and we was considered reactionaries. And that put us in a little different picture. They wanted to keep us busy because they couldn't teach us nothing. They couldn't tell us nothing because we wouldn't listen to them. And in that camp, they'd ship some in, and like Belhomie. Now Belhomie and Coward was in that camp, and there's two of the ones that stayed back. But when we'd sort them suckers out, it didn't take us long to make believers out of it,
Was there any much physical torture by the North Koreans?
Now, it's been a long time, but really, as far as them beating you, and there was a few guys got punched with bayonets, and there was a few guys got the butt stroke administered to them and stuff like that. But I'm telling you, it ain't one of those things where they're sadistic about it. They'd put you in a hole and leave you there for a week or so, and there'd be water and rats and what have you and that. They'd put you in a room. And yeah, some of the torture was severe to the point that guys would crack and lose their facilities, go crazy. But you got to figure there's a lot of weak people in places like that too. So when you get in a damn hole or something like that, you've got to think about something at that hole. And the food, we built everything from chocolate ants. There ain't nothing in this world that we didn't think of to eat when we got back, and none of us could eat any of it when we got back. I don't, outside of marching us until we was plumb down to nothing but bone, I weighed, I was out of the PW camp for 2 months or better, and I weighed I believe it was 116 pounds. But see, when the negotiations wasn't going good, then they want to feed us a little better and stuff like that. But at one time, I was down below 90 pounds. Normal weight, body weight's about 170 when I was in good shape and everything. But I never got over about 150 for 2 years after I got out.
Well, anything else?
Well, there's tons of other stuff. I can sit here and recall it all day long, just the incident here and the incident there. But
any particular incident? What's the funniest thing happened to the camp?
Well, a lot of things would go on for, say, from a week to maybe a month. But I guess the one thing that sticks in my mind was, like I tell you, we was always harassing them Chinese, and we had some guys that had been in the Navy. I believe the old boy's name was Copeland. You ever hear of a seaman's saddle where they go down inside the ships and scrape paint and stuff?
Yeah.
It's geared up out of ropes. Well, now them Chinese, they'd have bed check naturally, and usually it was all we had was little oil lamps, and we'd make them ourselves out of a tin can and some peanut or some soybean oil or wick of some sort, if we could manage to steal some of it. But anyhow, normally at dark was when you went to bed. And then about an hour later, well, they'd come around and make bed check. Well, it'd usually be two. There'd always be, there'd never be one. It'd be two come around. And we had them that we knew was trigger happy and ones that was easy excited and this, that, and the other. And this old boy took and made him a seaman saddle and got a little old stool and stood up on it and got right in the middle of that walkway in that building. And he heard them Chinamen coming and he just kicked that deal over underneath the platform, and there he hung. Had the hangman's noose there, and there he hung. Well, that kept them Chinamen up for about a month, I'd say, because, boy, they kept one in there all the time from then on for, I guess, a good month. But it scared them two plumb to death. They walked in there, old boy hung himself. Of course, he had that seaman saddle rigged up to where all it done just stretched his neck a little bit. And when they left, he got down and undone that rope and stuff and got in bed right quick. And when he got back down there with the Chinese company commander, he couldn't understand it. There's supposed to have been somebody there hung, they couldn't find nobody. So it took them about a month to figure that out. That is probably the one thing that I'll remember. Oh. Huh?
I was going to ask, the average food every day.
Well, I'll tell you what, the overall food picture was rice, corn, millet. Rice was very infrequent, probably a couple of times a month. You usually, for the first 2 years, we got whole kernel corn. Once in a great while, it'd be cracked, just like you feed the hogs, and it'd be boiling water. Sometimes it'd have salt in it, and sometimes it wouldn't. And in the summertime, you'd get a few greens, and they'd butcher a hog for 470 people and cook about 4 or 5 meals out of that one hog. And they'd give you a piece of meat of probably less than an inch square. And it was divided out very carefully, very carefully. Whoever was on detail would go up and pick up the chow. They issued us a bucket, a 14-quart bucket, and a wash pan, just like we used to wash our hands and face in. And that's what you'd draw the broth or soup in, and you'd draw the rice or whatever's in the bucket. And when you come back, whoever drew it, everybody rotated so you get a shot at dishing it out. And you better dish that meat out. It was all tucked out and laid aside, cut up and portioned out. There's maybe a little bite, you might say. But it would be, for the 472 of us, they would probably take 10 pounds of meat and make the soup. And it would be daikons, like you buy them at the commissary and stores now. It's an old sugar beet reddish type thing. A Chinese cabbage, but it would be just enough to flavor that broth, but that'd be all. And then the last 6 or 8 months, they got to getting a little flour, and it was usually made out of sorghum instead of wheat. And then when we'd get wheat flour, it would have American flags on it. They had got it through the Chiang Kai-shek land lease deal in 49, I guess. They run them all out of the States in 49, best I can remember. And Chiang Kai-shek out of China, Mao Zedong running out, communist leader. And then that was about the extent of it. Once in a while on a holiday, one time they issued 2 spoonsful of rice whiskey, like that stuff was in the canteen. And then they'd get apples, not a pair, but there's usually always apples. Once in a while you get one apiece. And that was about it. And smoking tobacco. Now there was the thing right there that when we got is rationing that stuff out. We'd borrow puffs off of people, you know. Wouldn't be cigarettes, it'd just be a drag off of a cigarette. And I had 2 or 3 pretty good fisticuffs over like a quarter of a cigarette or 4 or 5 drags on it. And the last month that we was there, they issued us a bunch of tailor-made Chinese cigarettes, and they wouldn't. What was happening? They knew that we was going to get turned loose, I guess, then.
Were the trains just the trench type of train you had?
Just a hole in the ground with logs across it. Slip trench.
Any shower facilities in
No, no. The only shower facility we went swimming was right there on that Yellow River, and we'd bathe in the lake or river.
What about haircuts and shaves?
We done it ourselves. We had an old boy that they give him some kind of a damn razor, and he'd sharpen it on a rock, and a pair of old clippers. But I had a beard done long one time, and I'd managed to keep my hair pretty well cut back. But I showed you that picture in there a while ago.
Yeah, of you in the prison camp?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But now you can see about how big I was there. See how?
Now, is this you with the hat on?
Yeah. Wait just a minute. I'll get you some pictures. Now there's my dad.
1919.
That's me right there. That was when I went back to Korean.
Oh,
Okay. Here I am right here. They was waiting to debark right there.
now is this going or coming?
Coming. They was
Now,
waiting to
which
get
one-
off in
which one
San
is you?
Francisco right here.
Oh, between the two guys there.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, that's my uncle and that's me.
Mhm.
That was a couple of days after I was repatriated. And here, you can see how I'm drawed up there, just barely holding my pants up. That old Pop Cunningham, that was a good one. He held church services for us.
Now these are all on the boat coming back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's another one there, that boat. No,
Well, that-
yeah, coming in, okay.
Yeah.
And that's my brother and his wife. That's me over here. See, them girls was a lot better than I was. That's my cousins
Yeah.
there in California. This is my Aunt Frida, and that's my oldest brother. And where am I? Right here I am.
Yeah.
This old kid here, I was always bigger than him when he was a kid. And I'm about 3 years older. No, about 2 years older. But he decided that he could whoop me, and I don't know where I gathered up a bunch of the strength. I just a little more grit, I guess. But he challenged me, and I told him, I was, hey, Hoss, they ain't a forehand life with me. I just joshed him, you know. And he locked onto me, and I like broke his back. I threw him against the ground so heavy. He never did mess with me anymore. He retired E9 out of the Air Force, medical technician.
Yeah.
There I am again. There's a little rocket again. You just leave it up here. That's my brother's in the Navy. Now you talking about some oldies. See, that's my dad right there.
Yeah.
He was a logging in Arkansas when that happened.
How old is this picture?
Oh, I don't know. Has it got something on it there? Second from right, colon forehand. Hey, Johnny Drew. He went through the mail, that old man did. You know? You
Do you have any
Here's that was old Lieutenant Moore out of Dallas, Texas. That was that rocket section.
Do you have any photographs of you during the prison camp?
Just that one.
Just that one
Yeah.
newspaper.
And there's the cadre that gave me my basic training. This is Gilmore here, and these old boys here now was soldiers. They was Merle Marauders during the Second World War.
They were.
Yeah. Sergeant Grimes and Gilmore.
Where do they live now? Are they still living?
I don't have any idea. That was stuck in 48.
That was in
At Fort Lewis, Washington.
Yeah.
They was both NCOs of Merle Marauders. And this guy here, he was a platoon sergeant. Now there's a. Oh, here old Spike or Mike is. Now see, I didn't get real heavy for a while. That was going overseas.
You say Mike.
That's his old dog.
Oh, okay.
That's one of them dogs I was telling you about.
That's the dog you brought back.
Yeah. The other one was twins to this one, or mates, you know, litter mate.
Yeah.
And he, by golly, for some reason, and I didn't know until they had a PW deal on TV one time what happened to that dog. Because the day that we got ready to leave that PW camp in North Korea, we couldn't find the other dog. And one of them 21 had him. If we'd have knew it, we'd have killed every damn one of them. If we'd have knew it, you know. But we figured that he would just run off somewhere or another and went over. There's another camp around on the other side, about 500 yards from where we was at, and they'd go back and forth. Now, them dogs hated Chinese. The Chinese couldn't get close to them. And why they... That's when I was a drill sergeant. Oh, yeah. That was when I was getting ready to fire for Kennedy in Berlin Ring. Yeah.
Oh, it was in Berlin when Kennedy was coming over.
Yeah. Now here's that guy that I was telling you, he was a sergeant first class. I couldn't even tell me his division's commander's name. Mr. Jesse.
He had the CIB on.
Well, all you got to do is be in combat.
I know.
Back in them days to get it. Unit, they awarded them to units. Now that was when we was maneuvering in Germany for that Berlin situation. But I don't think I've got any. I had a bunch of stuff destroyed. It'd just be luck if I'd run into anything.
Well, that's okay. But I think we have a good interview.
Well,
what else you got?
that was when I first went in. Oh, ain't that a trooper? You know, there's a lot of stuff, and when you leave here, there'll be a lot of stuff I wish I'd thought of. But by golly,
Well, what you need to do is when you think of something, write it down, or we can do another session.
well, I don't know what you got to do with this. You're just gonna.
Well, this will go in the archives, and people they'll be.
Or anything that you could say that the Chinese were brutal, other than the fact they starved us to death and tried to brainwash us, which in most cases really was worse than brainwashing.
Yeah.
Or brainwashing was worse than physical torture.
Why did you say you were lucky you were captured by the Koreans?
Well, now the Koreans, they the ones that they were barbaric. They murdered people and shot them, you know, after they was captured. That, like I was telling you about that Tiger. See, he was even mentioned in the negotiations. They wanted him tried for war atrocities, but they never did surrender him. But it was a proven fact that he just walked up and shoot guys on marches, and somebody refused to do something or get a little loud. Well, that he just walked up and blow their brains out. No question that. I never talked about that or anything, and you know, you tend to forget a lot of stuff when you don't. There's a number of reasons why I didn't talk about it, because the average person couldn't understand how somebody could go through that and make it back. And there's things that happened to me in combat that I should have never come back 3 or 4 times.
What happened?
We jumped off on an offensive one day, and 7 o'clock in the morning, if my time was right, or if my memory serves me right. And just as, of course, now back in them days, our old equipment was bulky and heavy. And I was carrying a 619 radio. It and the battery pack weighed 57 pounds, plus 3 days ration with carbine and grenades and ammunition. I probably was carrying close to 100 pounds of equipment. And I was having to lean down, and I was looking dead at the ground. we come to a rock. It was all half as big as this house. And I was intermingled with the infantry squad, but when they come to that rock, they went to the left, and when I got up, it looked to me like it was easier to go to the right, so I went to the right. Well, I had that old carbine like this, and when I got about halfway around that rock, I looked up, and there a North Korean was. I could shake hands with him. And I looked him dead in the eyeball, and he dead-eyed me, and he turned and went, and I turned and run over the lieutenant and the PFC going up the hill behind me. And that was a cowardly act, I guess. It was funny because when I looked up, I couldn't think of what to do. I was just froze. And either one of us could have just tripped the trigger, and that carbine shoot over 600 rounds a minute. So you know what he had done to him. He had a Russian burst gun. But when he run back around the rock, the DAR man got him. But just momentarily froze when I was walking. Like I say, I was having to get down and dig and get uphill with that load on. And I looked up, and there he was. And little things like that. I had rounds to go on my foxhole, like I told you a while ago. And I got to where I thought a foxhole was obsolete. I wouldn't even dig one if they didn't make me. And switching from one unit to the other, I switched from that one to 23rd, which is a bunch of fire eaters, the best infantry in the theater, to the other one, and 180 out. There's no fight in one unit. And I was in on that. See, that was the first time anything like that had ever happened. That was the beginning of the change of the military there. And the things, I was on all, I'll tell you a deal, a highlight in my military career. I forget to mention this. I hosted the 90th Division, First World War veterans at Lake Texoma Lodge. I went down there for a week, and the youngest one at that time was 67 years old. And this was in about 1960 or 61. But anyhow, I stayed down there a week, and they had all the big shots, all the division commanders, and they was people like the Supreme Court judges of Texas, been the commander of the division, and the old boys that they called, one of them was Ready, and the other one was Kilowatt. They owned the Texas Electric Corporation. And there's all big shots, you might say, but they had old Blackjack Bergen's personal bugler down there. He still had the bugle. He sounded every bugle call that the Army had. And he is the youngest one down. I think they said he was 67 years old, up to in their 90s. And I stayed down there for a solid week. You talk about living it up. I had anything I wanted on the house. The last day, well, I got the old Honest John out there, and it's a pretty good sized rig. So I was giving them a critique on it, and every morning I had 15 minutes, anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes on the local radio station. Well, when I was critiquing them, the day I left there, the last day of the program, out of a clear blue sky, I asked them, I said, would you folks like to ride on the Honest John? Everybody, yeah. Now you can just see running around the parking lot dragging concrete deals over and blocks and everything else getting them on it, but I hauled the men around first. Took them plumb around that parking lot. Have you ever been down there at the lodges? It's a pretty good sized place. Took them all the way around, pulled back and debarked them, and the old lady walked up to me, and she was 75. And she said, "You're going to ride us, ain't you, Sergeant?" I said, "Yes, ma'am. I sure will." Well, I got them, and I had 2 women in the front seat, and I decided I might ought to drive this bunch around. And come back, I made the round around, and when I got ready to park, well, this lady said, "We're not stopping." I said, "We're going to make one more round, so we're not about to let them old codgers beat us." She said, "If you stop, I'm going to shin you." So I had to take them around again. And I got letters of accommodation. I got recognized all the way up to DOA, and it was on record that as long as I was at Sill, wasn't any inconvenience or anything, that I'd be the one to bring that display down there from then on every year, as long as they helped it. And then everything went to happen pretty swift, the Berlin Wall and all that stuff. But I really had a ball down there now. Them old people really enjoyed that. That's where I eat my catfish dumplings and all that kind of stuff. Boy, they fed. They was no stops whatsoever. But I was appointed to NCOIC. It was several officer unassisted. I was about one of the few, one of the only that they'd let leave Fort Sill with a couple $1 million worth of equipment to come back on his own end without NCO or without OIC. And I made the Armed Forces Day several times in the city, and I made that. I went to White Sands Proving Ground, fired for Brooker, and I fired for. Well, we set the 8-inch cannon up that fired the first blivet round. And
What about Atomic Annie?
huh?
Atomic Annie. That the cannon that fires the nuclear round?
Yeah, you know you can only fire. Well, I mean I shouldn't talk too much about that, I guess. But that you don't do anything that you don't normally do in a normal course of duty day. You go down and set that gun up, and you're not around it when it's fired. Everything is test fired. Of course, they don't know what's going to happen back in them days. The Atomic Annie, I think you're talking about 280.
Yeah.
Okay, now that 280, that wasn't the first one that fired the atomic round. That was 8-inch howitzer, I believe. If you check out, it was the first one that fired it. But that 280, they only made 18 of them, and they cost $1.5 million a gun, and they wasn't what was happening. Really, all you get to fire is about one round in a situation like that, and then you forget all of that equipment. But of course, all you need is one round too. So.
The Germans in World War II had the one they called Dora.
That's a railroad gun.
Railroad gun. It's in Switzerland now, and it's a
mountain.
280. Is it 280?
No, it's about 240.
240.
See, now we had 240 millimeter
Now is
artillery pieces.
Yeah. Now is that Leopold or is that Dora? Now Leopold is one they called Amzio Annie.
I don't know. That was before my time.
Yeah.
But now the 240, they disbanded them because they was used for coast artillery. It took too much equipment to put it in. It took 6 hours to put it into position. But that 280 that you're talking about, they could put into position and fire it in 10 minutes. All they done was run up there and jack base plates down, and they had a recoil system on it that was a dual. One recoil and the other would take the shot, and it was just like shooting a rifle, you might say, gas-operated rifle. But it wasn't feasible because of the price of it and maneuverability of it and this, that, and the other. When they had, like Honest Johns would do the same thing. Little Johns, even Little John now do the same job that they don't have anymore. I deactivated the last Little John outfit in Hawaii just before I retired. But they'll do the same job, so why have that old big artillery piece out there now?
Well, anything
Yeah.
else about prison camp? Any particular incidents or?
Well, we done a lot of scrapping. We talked about everything that you can imagine to talk about.
Yep.
Done a lot of fist fighting. We've done that for recreation more than anything else. Oh, we'd be serious about what we was fighting about, like a puff or two on a cigarette, or they'd issue sugar once in a while. It'd be over a teaspoon of sugar or something. I fought an old kid one time over 2 puffs on a cigarette, 2 drags on a cigarette. And we'd get a pack of tobacco a month that was probably about the size of a Cracker Jack box, just about the size. Probably about 4 ounces of tobacco. And we had to make that last a month, see. And we kept ourselves pretty well occupied by keeping the Chinese confused. We had, they got a few old instruments in there, and they had a hillbilly band, and we'd have church service with old Pop Cunningham there. He'd hold them on Sunday for us, you know. Never did know whether he was a chaplain or officer or what he was. Even I lost contact when he was repatriated. But I have a feeling that he was a chaplain. I don't know why. And I don't know why he wouldn't admit to fess up to it unless, see, they separated all the officers and stuff like that. Now, the NCOs and privates and stuff later on, well, they mixed us. But they kept the officers what admitted as officers. Now, there's a lot of officers in that place that they didn't want the Chinese to know they was officers because they knew they'd separate. so before they get captured, I guess they just kick the bars off and stuff, you know. But anyway, I know 2 or 3 captains that was PWs, and they always said that they wanted to be with us instead of with the officers. Now, that was their own doing, say. So Pop, I don't know where old Pop Cunningham was an officer or enlisted man, but he preached a good sermon and everything. Of course, you don't have to be an officer to do that, but it's a good indication that he knew what he was doing when he's preaching.
What about recreation? Did you put on plays, whatever?
No, a time or two, they had a deal where they'd go down and old boys would sing a little. They'd put on a boxing match one time and amongst PWs, and they had an Olympics-like deal, and they made a big thing out of it. And there's another way we'd get our information back and forth when they go from camp to camp doing stuff. See. You had to be pretty good, and we had some old boys that was pretty damn salty boxers and track people and stuff like that. Yeah, they called the Olympics and stuff. It was strictly publicity is all it was.
Any idea why the Koreans were worse than the Chinese?
Well, they're just more barbaric, you know. See, of course, now the main reason I would guess if I was them, it would be because we had already annihilated their army. They was giving up so dang fast that we couldn't even furnish guards. We just tell them to keep going south. Put your hands on their head and keep walking down the road south. They'd have a guard for every 200 or 300 of them. That's how, I mean, once we started, got inland and got our foothold and started whooping heads, we was we went across the Mekong River. See, the first offensive we had was Taegu, Mason, and Pusan Prairie. And we unloaded them cannons, and we was all within 2 miles of the beach. And about the second day we was there, they unloaded infantry behind us. They fell in behind the guns, formed a scrimmage line, and pushed forward. And we thought we had infantry support. You're supposed to, artillery, you know. Then every once in a while there'd be 4 or 5 old boys getting back out of the 24th, and outfits had been hit up there. So they wasn't nothing. They didn't. I mean, we as artillery tube was the front line. Front of that tube was. And we started firing. Man, we fired artillery. We fired them little guns to get hot. The damn paint would pop off of them. We'd pour water on them. We had the cooks and mechanics and anybody we could get breaking ammo before. We fired the artillery battery one night. It's 6 guns. We fired 1,200 rounds of battery. You think I'd poke them out there now?
105s?
Yeah, and when we started across that Yellow River, or Nekton, they was estimated that there was a 5,000 pocket up in there, North Koreans. And we dropped leaflets and everything else for them to surrender. Well, they put the pontoon bridge across so we'd get our tanks and artillery across. And then they had them and they couldn't get away. The river was, they'd have to run open country probably 300 to 500 yards from the riverbank. And whenever they give them all the chances, they wouldn't give up. So we come this running aircraft down on them, and when the aircraft leave, they'd let up and try to get across the river. And we'd division artillery. And of course, see, you had 3 battalions of division, light and heavy, had 8 inch, and then a couple of 155 battalions. All guns firing on that one pocket. And they had guys stationed all probably every 15 or 20 feet with poles poking them under that bridge, pontoon bridge. They didn't have time to fish them out. Every once in a while the GI would come down and they'd fish him out. But that river was, it was a half a mile wide right there where we pontooned. And then after we jumped that river, that dog, it was all over but the singing now. We went to whooping heads. The aircraft would come in and eat them up, and when they'd leave, we'd let them get out and get the steering around and think it's all over, and then we'd turn artillery loose.
How many Chinese were killed in that?
Oh, I don't have any idea. I really don't.
I mean Koreans, but I'm sorry.
Yeah. They was estimated to be a 600,000 man army, North Koreans. And we completely smoked them, and we annihilated their army. the only thing they had left. Now see, that was a funny situation. Now, every time we'd go to whooping them and really get them on the go, they'd cease fire and talk a while. And when you get a guy down, you don't want him up, you got to whoop him. And that's what happened there in Korea. About 3 times we stopped. We get up on the 40th parallel, they stopped us, and then we jumped off again. Then by that time the Chinese come in. See, of course, all that we didn't annihilate had got north up into Manchuria and then like that. But they was giving up so fast that we couldn't no way furnish guard stuff. They just had the areas back there like cattle pens to put them in to get them over on Kojido Island. But then when them Chinese come in, it was a different story altogether. Now they proved that they could match flesh against steel. It's a little different term you use, something like that, but that's the way it was. And there was thousands of them suckers. I never saw the like in my life. I talked to Second World War veterans. Of course, all the older guys, mostly NCOs and officers, there's no comparison to that deal in the Second World War. Especially the ones that was in Europe and stuff. Well, I never done much prep time for this interview, but there were so many things that went on. You figure 33 months and 3 days. The high points of it is losing the weight, gaining the weight, I guess, and harassment of the Chinese once in a while. But there's so many incidents, if I could sit around and think, I'd probably recall been a lot more interesting for you.
Oh, this is fine. It's been good.
Well, I was in the old Brown Shoe Army, and I went all the way from that to the paratrooper boot, you might say. Well, I went in, of course, I just an old green kid, and I'd lived a half a lifetime by the time I was 25 years old, but then I was in 10 major engagements with the enemy, and well, I got credit for 2 after I was captured, but I faced fire many a time, you know, just patrol and stuff like that, but I got credit for 10 major engagements, and you get through 3 or 4 of them, you done a pretty good job, you know. And I'll tell you one thing about combat, you don't really get to want to kill until you see your buddy get killed. And once you see one American get killed, then it's over. Go ahead and do your job. But I never lost sight of being fair to people, like that guy kicking that Korean around. I couldn't understand that. That old boy shouldn't. Once you get a man and he's give up, he's at your mercy. He shouldn't be appointed to the Geneva Convention and all that stuff. And then Chinese, they've been at war all their lives. All of them countries have. Hell, Korea was dominated and controlled, or what do you call it, the Japanese kept them under control. What do you call it? Occupation.
Occupied.
Yeah. They kept them occupied, and then, of course, China and Mongolia, they've been held ever since time. They've been in wars. There's no way that you can muster an army big enough to control China. You can control the major cities and stuff like that, but China's a vast country. There's just no way that you could ever control them people, occupy them. And that's why them little old bands keep rising up. Pretty soon they get enough followers to start a damn war, and here they come again. I got to meet all the Turks and the British, Canadians, Australians. I'll tell you one thing, you can take one Australian and throw him into a whole squad of English, and that old boy whoop every one of them. Yeah, they had to separate the Australians and the British. There was no grounds they could get along on.
Yeah, I worked with some of them in Vietnam. They were good fighters.
Yeah, and one of them had, one old Aussie, he had that old hat. And the worst mistake you'd ever do is pick that hat up. Don't touch that mountain hat, leave him alone. But they didn't like the British. After I got to knowing more about them, well, I could understand. They started out as penal colonies and stuff, you know. I guess we was arguing about education one night. And they had 14 British, and I had whooped one of them old boys in a fist fight. And he was supposed to have been a regimental champion. And me and him got into it one day, and I out-fisticuffed him. He just couldn't hardly take that. So he was going to go into training, and he suggested I did, and he was going to challenge me in about 30 days from there. And of course, we never did get around to the major fight. But we was talking about education, and I couldn't think of nothing to say, but I listened to them. They were saying that their educational standard is higher than the ones in the United States. What's that college they're famous for?
Oxford.
Oxford, yeah, Oxford. Comparing Oxford to Harvard. And I raised up and I said, well, fellas, I don't know. But it seems to me like we taught you old boys a damn lesson back in 1776, if I remember right. Of course, every one of them would jump up and go fighting this. Yeah.
Well, I
NC
think. Go ahead.
Their NCOs, they had a lot more prestige than ours did. When that old sergeant major in the British Army speaks, everybody listens. He's like E.F. Hutton. Everybody listens to that joke. And he carries about the same weight, I guess, as a bird colonel in the U.S. Army. He carries that swagger stick, and ain't nothing keeping him from reaching out and tapping an old boy pretty heavy with it. No, I don't know what else to
I think we
tell
have a
you.
good interview. We have about 2.5 hours.
There's so much more went on that I forgot about, and I just keep recalling it as a talk. You declare yourself you had a fight on there. There's no question about that. That was just a recreational thing. I can't think of anything else.
Well, we have a good interview.
We didn't have no medical, of course. That picture you saw there was propaganda. They had some kind of white powder, and I don't care what you went up there for, they'd give you a little bit of the newspaper. That was supposed to take care of everything. So we just didn't bother going. That time there was strictly a publicity stunt because old Nolan, I think Frank Nolan's the one that's buried in the punch bowl in Hawaii, if I remember right. He's the only civilian in that military hospital. I'm not sure, don't quote me, but we were set up on that, and they wanted volunteers, and I said, well, hell, if it's going to get out to the press in the United States, I'll damn sure go. And that other old boy, Armenio there, he's from New York. I believe it says he's from New York, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okie dokie, I got him. That's the best I can figure out. Now, I could tell you about some barroom brawl.